Hey everybody, it's Billy from Writers. I thought it'd be kind of a fun thing to do to finish out National Novel Writing Month with a question that came in yesterday, and I think it'll work very well to do as a video response. So an anonymous follower wrote in, "I can't decide between writing my story in first or third person. I originally had it in first, and in the context of the story, it makes sense to be in first. It's a recounting of prior events from the main character's previous experiences. However, I was bored and I decided to write up the epilogue, which was in third person, and I think I enjoyed it way more and was able to do more through not being limited with perspective. But again, I think the narrative calls for first person. Suggestions." Okay, so let's talk real quick about the different perspectives, because obviously the person that sent the question is aware of our options. But for anyone who isn't as familiar with that, let's take a moment to talk. First person is me. I am the one telling the story, right? And I can only access the information that I have. So as the person with the anonymous person said, it's very limiting in a sense because you have to work with that one perspective. Okay. Second person is your next option. It's very difficult to work with, but this is a situation where, as the writer, I am telling you, the reader, what is going on for you, the character in the story. So you're actually making that person a character in the story. And you may have seen this in like a text RPG where you just type in, dig a hole, and then they talk. And then you get a reading that says you do this. Along with that, the next one we want to look at is third person, which is you as the narrator are telling the story to a reader, and nobody is directly involved. So as the narrator, I have some information about everything going on in the story. And we can talk a little bit in just a moment about how much that changes. So we'll ignore second person for now and just focus on first and third because that's where the question comes from. So we talked about how limited the knowledge and the information of that first person narrative is. And it can be very, very limiting. But at the same time, as a writer, you can dig into who that character is, right? So in this situation that we were just talking about in the question, they appreciate the fact that they can have that one perspective. And as a writer, if I'm working with first person, I want to dig into who my narrator is, right? So there's a lot of things that can happen with that. So how trustworthy is my narrator about the story that they're telling? For example, if my character is the Joker, and the Joker is telling this story about his experiences, he's going to tell us how terrible Batman is, how he's the villain of the story. But if we have a third-person narrator, they're probably not going to see it that way, right? So, you can have a dishonest narrator of a first-person story because we all have our prejudices about who we are and how we view ourselves. But also allows you to get to know that character. And you have to have those conversations where you say, who are you? And what are your hopes and goals? Right, third person. With a third person narrator, there's some different options that you can have. So you can have a limited focus, and you can do a very similar thing to the first person, where as the narrator, I only really know what's going on with one character. I really only follow one character, and there's other things going on in this part of the story, but I don't know anything about them because I'm right here in the present, in the moment, right? And so that's also very similar to that part of it. But you can go to the point where you know a group of people, or you actually have what we call omniscient third person, where the narrator knows everything about everybody and everything that's going on, and they pick and choose what they tell you about, right? And as a writer, and if you're working on a story, you should know everything about everybody, but it's a matter of how much you want to tell. So if there's a secret thing going on in this part of your story, right there, maybe you want to tell about it. but maybe you want to hold it onto it and just keep it secret. And that's an important, part of your storytelling, because even though you're omniscient and you know everything, you don't tell everything. So let's look at a little bit closer. Actually, let me talk real quick about tenses. So you can have past, present, and future. So past is like, he did this, she did that, he said this, he said that. Present is, you say this, he says that. It's in the now. So when you're looking at a past tense, it's things that have already happened. And so there's less of, what do I want to say? With the past tense, there's less of a focus on immediacy, I think, a lot of times. I mean, you can have those moments where you're like, oh my God, what's going to happen? I need to turn the page. But it's more of a thing that's already happened. It's like if I'm talking about World War II, it's done. We know what happened. It's already written. Whereas if we're talking about the present tense, and we're talking about North Korea, and are there going to be nuclear bombs flying all over the place? We don't know what's going to happen because it's in the present right now. And so there's more of that uncertainty and immediacy. Now, if you're talking about the future tense, that's a little trickier, and we won't worry about that right now. So let's go back to the question. Now we've talked about persons and perspectives and times and all that kind of stuff. So the thing that I think about when I read this question, and the person who's the anonymous person says, I wrote this part in the first person, and it really fits with what I'm doing, and I want it to be that way. But the second part, the epilogue, was so good in that third person that I don't want to let that go either. Right? And that's got a great tension to it. And that's an important thing when you're writing too, to have that internal tension on your own self where you're saying, what do I do? How do I make this work in a way? Because I want this, and I want this, and I want this, and I want this. I want both of these things, but I don't know if I can have them both. The question that I have is, why can't you have both? Right? So when you're looking at the question, hold on a second here because okay, so I looked at the question real quick just to double check something. It doesn't talk about it, and I wish it had, because if you're doing the first person for that part and you're reviewing what happened in the past, right, it makes sense to have that as a first person limited narration. And then what I'm thinking about is, what if the epilogue is just in third person? It doesn't have to be the same. One of the great things about writing is there's so many different ways to go about different things. And if you're willing to and you're able to make it work, you can explore all kinds of different varieties of options. And so it could work very well to have that main narration be in first person, where you're in that person's head and they're the ones that are telling you everything about what's going on. And then the ending can be the epilogue can be in third person. It's a separate period of time. Here is this in this part, and here is this part here. And it's at different times and different activities that are going on. So it could be, there's some different things, and none of these actually have to be specified. But what if this person that's writing that's the narrator in this first person narrative put a diary together? And there's this person who is writing the epilogue part that found that diary and turned it into a story, and use that person's experiences to make that story, and they want to make that more real and more dramatic by using the first person, and the epilogue is capped off by that person who is writing the story. And that's just an image of how it could work out. And you don't even need to explain that. You can just be like, here's my story. Here's the epilogue. Here I'm telling the story as first person, and here I'm doing the epilogue as third person. And there's no reason that it can't work as long as it flows well. One of the things that I think about with this particular idea, and it doesn't change perspectives, but like the ending of Harry Potter. right? You have that last scene, and it feels so different. I mean, I understand, yes, they're adults, and they're sending their kids off to school. But here's this narrative of 7 books or 8 movies, depending on how you're seeing or experiencing Harry Potter, right? But you have this big long thing, and this is the whole experience. And there's the 7 years of them growing up and becoming adults and living that life. And then you jump to the epilogue, and it's a completely different feel because it's a completely different thing. And there's no reason that you can't do a similar thing with a narrative where you're working with first person and going to third person. Again, it's just a matter of how you make that flow work and how you explain it. Well, and not even that you necessarily have to explain it, but something you could say is, like just be like, here's a quick note before the epilogue that says how this is working. And it could work out just as well that the same person that's telling the story in that first part is doing the epilogue, and they just decide to do it in a different way. All right, so there you go. Hopefully that makes sense and it gives you some ways to work. If you have other questions, send them to writers. We would love to answer them. Have a great day. Bye.